Today on Corinne's Pick, Sue Matthews. Today we have an amazing artist from the Bay Area in San Francisco, in Bay Area in California, Susan Matthews. We have her via Skype. She is an extraordinary painter. She's a percussionist, and she's an adjunct professor at San Mateo College in California. I've known her for almost 20 years, and I know her work very well. She's exhibited in Ghana, Senegal, Alaska, throughout the United States, and a lot in Cuba. She's has museum credits. She's in major collections around the country, including myself. I have a few of her paintings, and I'd love to present Miss Susan Matthews. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Corinne.
Let's talk about your work. What are the major, what's the major point of your work? Like, what are you trying to convey in your work? What is your work about? If you could just explain.
Well, I work in series, so I'll get an idea and then I'll follow that through a series of maybe 20 paintings or more. And for many years, I've been working on the music and folklore of Cuba, because I started going there maybe 1994 or 5 to study percussion, and I got very interested in the folklore and the history, and I started painting my teachers, street Roombas, dance classes. I started painting about the deity, and then I got involved in a project called Secrets Under the Skin, which is out of the University of Alaska, led by Jill Flanders Crosby, and that took us to study the connections between Cuba and Ghana, because the Ghanaian people in the Volta region of Togo and Ghana, there are very, very obvious connections where the Cubans have saved their culture for hundreds of years, and we as a group of artists studied that connection, and through our own media, painting, photography, video, and writing, we explored that theme. So my paintings have been about that for quite a while.
A lot of people don't know about the Afro-Cuban, I guess, sacred traditions. Can you explain a little bit about that and why it may be a connection to Ghana?
Well, the connection was discovered by Jill Flanders Crosby through dance. She's a dance professor at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. And she noticed, when she took a course in New York City with some Cubans, she noticed that they were doing very similar moves and gestures to people that she had known in Ghana. In Accra, she was there for a long time, and in some villages, in one village in particular called Joje, outside of Ghana, and also in Togo. And she decided to look at that and try to see what the connections were. And they're very, very stark connections. For example, the rhythms, dances, a lot of the music, some of the lyrics even, some of the words, altars, deities. The Cubans have saved a lot of that ritual, dance, and they still practice it in ritual contexts. In fact, there are still cabildos, which are like churches that have been in operation since the slave days, that are still functioning, that still play the ancient drums that were made by first generation Africans. So there's a lot to look at, a lot to study, and a lot to paint about.
Okay, I want to get to some of your the actual paintings so people will know what we're talking about. But before we even go there, I know there's an elephant in the room. Let's get to the elephant. So we've talked about this forever. Um, a lot of people in the United States, especially the millennials, they're into this thing about cultural appropriation, and why is somebody obviously of European descent painting images of from the African diaspora. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting subject for sure. I think the key to that is that my motivation for painting these pictures was not anything to do with race. In fact, I didn't really think about it or even realize I was doing that. I was painting my teachers and people that I met and friends in Cuba mostly. And then my brother went to live in Africa, and I went there and I painted 20 pictures of people as icon portraits uh, from Niger, from the edge of the Sahara Desert, the Sahel. But I wasn't painting with any agenda. I was just painting what was interesting to me. And I thought, well, then I realized at some point, oh my God, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this because I'm white. But then I thought, well, that that's really not that's not that probably not true, because what if somebody from Cuba came to visit me and wanted to paint me? I would say, no, you can't do it because you're black. That'd be ridiculous. And most people, let's face it, in this world are not white. So I don't know. It wasn't my motivation to paint about blackness. It just so happened that I was in Cuba studying music, and I was in Africa, and I was, meeting people, and I just became interested in their culture and the way they dressed and everything. So that was basically it right there.
So actually, there's a little interesting backstory. Actually, when I met you, I saw mostly your paintings from Cuba, and they were about the size of the painting behind you. Sue Matthews' paintings are enormous. It's really hard to discuss her paintings without really being in front of her paintings because they really envelop you. They're very, very large paintings. But I saw your paintings from Cuba when we first met. And the backstory that I came to understand is that you actually grew up in a predominantly, black environment, what people would call Afrocentric, so that even though linguistically you might sound like a white woman or you are racially white, um, your exposure to black culture is not that of a tourist necessarily because you grew up in Oakland in a
Yeah,
in
I
a
grew up
in a poor
in
neighborhood.
the age. I'm giving up my age, but I grew up in East Oakland in the time of the Black Panthers, and race was really on the top of everybody's mind. And I grew up in a you know neighborhood where nobody was educated. Black people weren't, and white people weren't. In fact, black people probably were maybe possibly more educated than the whites. And nobody had a real sophistication at that time about any of these issues. But the point is, for me, being around African American people was just normal every day. In fact, I used to work late at night, in San Francisco, and there was no BART back then. And I would have to wait on the corner at 12th and Broadway in East Oakland, or downtown. And the people that would always take care of me were the people that I was supposed to be scared of, including him. I kid you not. They would say, "Girl, what are you doing out here this time of night?" And they would make sure that I got on the bus okay. And then once I got on the bus, people would kind of like take care, they would take care of me a little bit. It was kind of, so I got the sense that all these people that were supposed to be so dangerous were going to take care of me in reality. So yeah, it's a matter of living in Oakland in an environment where there's just all different kinds of people. It's pretty great, really, you know.
Okay, so let's look at some of your paintings because I don't want to have this show run too long without really getting into your paintings in depthly. Maybe instead of me talking when the paintings come up, can you kind of explain each one and be like a narrator, if you
Yeah,
don't mind? Thank you. Okay,
sure.
so let's look at the first painting.
This was part of a series of interviews, many, many interviews that went on over many years in the Secrets Under the Skin project. I didn't conduct the interviews, but I was present for some of them. And in this, it's in colloquial Spanish, actually, which I do speak Spanish. So I wrote out 20 manuscripts. I call them manuscripts. And this is a about a myth in a particular town. And it's also about how the cockroaches have eaten what they were calling the libretas, which is the books full of songs. So this is partly about how culture is slowly disappearing. You know, for example, the cockroaches are eating the book with all these ancient songs that were saved from African times in Cuba. So that's what this is about.
Okay, the next image, please.
This painting is pretty recent. I think it's from last year. And it's for Women Drummers International, which has a drum camp for women here in Oakland every summer. And this is a painting of Olokun drums, which are what they call fundamental drums in Cuba. They're sacred drums. And Olokun is a deity that lives at the deepest part of the ocean. So every year for the women's drum camp, run by Carolyn Brandy, by the way, who is a great drummer, every year there's a theme. And the theme this past year was Olokun. And so this painting is a painting, it's sort of an imaginary painting of a deity at the bottom of the ocean playing these ancient drums, which I found out still exist in Matanzas province. And I was invited to go and see them next time I go there. I found them on the internet, but they're still played.
And about how large is this painting, would you say? What are
This
the
painting is
measurements?
not huge. I'm actually trying to work a little bit smaller. It's maybe 4 feet by 2.5, because it's just painting those large paintings. Although I love painting big paintings, it's just not practical.
Yeah.
I like painting really large work because you have to interact with it on the scale of your own body. But it's hard. I've even stopped stretching the painting because I have
Wow.
2 pieces. I'm hanging them like tapestries, and then I stretch it when I have to put it into a show.
Okay, let's talk about the next one.
Maybe 4.5 feet. Not huge. This is also a new painting. It's based on a garden in a town called Pedro Betancor in Matanzas province in Cuba, and it is a garden of a man, Ramon Gonzalez, who his father was actually a gardener. So I think his father worked in the Cuban sugar mill called Cuba Libre in Pedro Betancor. And anyway, Pupi, his name is Ramon Pupi. He still lives in his father's house, or in the gardener's house. This is a picture of his garden, but the white chair signifies the ancestors. It's a place for the ancestors. And there are 9 gourds full of water because the dead like to have 9 containers full of water. And then the rice is also feeding the ancestors. So that's what that painting is about. It looks like a garden chair, but it has more significance. This is a painting of a man named Robinson, who lived in Perico, Matanzas province in Cuba, and he has a shrine there to his father. You can see the shrine. I mean, there's the whole house is a shrine, and we brought him photos from the Volta region of Togo and Ghana, to show the connections. And so in this painting, he's looking at the photos and sort of recognizing the different ritual elements that are still practiced in Cuba as well.
Okay, yes, the next one.
This is a companion painting. These women of Joje Ghana are looking at paintings. They're looking at images from Cuba, and they're scrutinizing these images from Cuba and noticing the connections from their ritual culture.
Okay.
And the writing behind it is actually part of a conversation that we hosted between the Cubans and the Ghanaians via internet, starting out in Eve, translated into Spanish, which then I translated into English. And then we would translate everything back and forth so that people could communicate with each other.
Okay, we're going to go to break for about a minute and a half. We have a commercial break, and then
Can't
we'll
hear
get
you.
back. We have a commercial break, and then we're going to come back and explore some of your paintings some more.
I'm sorry, Corinne, I missed part of that.
We're going to a commercial.
Okay.
Commercial break, yeah.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
I'm sorry about that little our little break. So let's go to the next painting because I'm very excited to having to see your work again.
This is a town in Togo called Ajidogo, and it was I waited about 2 years before I painted this, but I couldn't get it off my mind. It's a traditional town, it's a traditional village, and it was so thrilling me to visit these villages in Africa, which I've been to quite a few of them, and the orderliness of villages. Everybody had their place. Everybody knew who they were, how they were supposed to fit into the village culture, and it was kind of like a self-sustaining village. There were coconut trees. There were trees that were being dried, building materials. There's farmland. It was just such a beautiful situation that I painted. And actually, the moon in the front is called Afeli, who is a deity that watches the house while people are away farms during the day. This is a woman named Hilda. She took us out to the sugarcane fields to show us where they would leave an offering in this town. And I took a picture of her, and I think that might have been the last time I saw her. I started to paint her, and I found out she had passed away. But the idea was, her deity is Elegua, who is the god of the crossroads, and you have to the Elegua can open the roads or close the roads for you. But in this case, since she is a child of Elegua, I depicted her with the white butterflies as the souls of the ancestors leaving the fields, leaving the sugarcane fields. And you could see the little deity at the bottom, who is represented as coconut with eyes and a mouth made of cowrie shell. This is a Cabildo de Magose. It's in a town called Agramonte in Matanzas province. And the drums are instrumental drums. They're sacred drums. There is an altar there for Babaluay, who is the god of sickness and health. And my entry into this painting was the quilt in the doorway. I noticed that quilt. It seemed like in a lot of different places that I went to, and people told me that it was a symbol of sort of the ancestors because it used pieces of their clothing in different colors. So anyway, this is an actually functioning cabildo that's still in use today. And there are some objects there that are said to have actually come directly from Africa. The beads, the necklaces hanging there. And people in Ghana thought that they didn't know that this was Cuba. They thought it was maybe Africa because the objects were so African. For example, the drums would have been probably made in Cuba, but by people who played those drums in Ghana and Togo. So they made them from the memory of how the drums were made in their homeland. This is the high priestess that we talked to in Joje, Ghana. And that mound is an earth deity, also Babaluay. In Spanish, it would be Babaluay, or in Lukumi, Cuba, they would call it Babaluay. But in Ghana, they would call it Togbi. And the dots on the skin, I mean, they represent skin rashes in Cuban mythology. Anyway, Dash took us into her hut and did a special ritual for us. And so I had to ask for permission to paint her on a large scale. And first she said yes, and I said, I'm not talking about in my sketchbook. I'm talking about a big painting that's going to be on display. And she said, well, let me ask Toby. Toby said no. 4 times we had to keep throwing the shells and giving Toby more money. And finally he said yes. We were able to paint her. And actually, I felt good about it because I wanted to support the shrine and pay for the right, or not pay for the right, pay for the privilege of painting her. Interestingly, in this painting, I painted her skin tone a normal skin tone, and it just never had the power that I wanted it to have until I painted her skin blue. And at that point, she became sort of otherworldly, and she became more like a priestess, that she is.
So I have a question for you. Actually, I kind of a statement. Maybe you could elaborate. We're talking about your paintings, but an integral part of your work is of a percussionist, and it does relate to your paintings. Can you explain a little bit more about your work as a percussionist?
Well, I think the percussion is what pulled me into the Cuban mythology, and then it opened up the doors for me to study by going to places. It's not like I've read that many books about all this stuff. I've just learned about it by going to Cuba, going to Ghana, going to Togo, and talking to people. But I think what opened up the doors for me was the drums. And I mean, forever and ever, the drums actually, they call the gods. They talk to the gods. The drums, the deities. We play to certain rhythms for different deities, and I think it's been a really important entry for me to be able to play and to really understand the music and really understand the rituals when I'm seeing them.
And as I recall, when I was in the Bay Area, you were called upon, quite frequently to be the drummer in many religious ceremonies. The people who were actually Cuban themselves were asking you to to participate with the drumming in their ceremonies?
Well, I think people more than that, they use my art for all kinds of, um, CD covers, book covers, musical events. I play in different bands, but you know, I have played in some ritual settings, but really with Carolyn Brandy, she is the leader of the bands that I may have played in some kind of ritual setting. But mostly it's the images that people have used for all kinds of, situations, which is nice for me because it means that they're accepted, in the community.
I know that we have about 2 minutes left of the show, but I do want to ask you two questions. One is about market forces, because part of being an artist is, if you want to survive, is respecting the market. How does the market affect what you do as an artist, if at all?
Probably not at all, I would say. Mostly. Um, I've I've been working basically just on what interests me for many, many, many years. I do commissions. Okay, sometimes I do commissions, but it's very open ended. Like I've been doing paintings for Carolyn Brandy's drum camp. But really, the market. I make my living from teaching at College of San Mateo, and it's it frees me to be able to explore whatever I want to explore in terms of my subject matter. Unfortunately, it's not always. I don't always find the collectors for it, but at the same time, I get to paint what I'm interested in. I don't know that I would really want to be painting people's pets necessarily, or things like that. I don't know what people would. And I'm much more interested in um, this kind of content that spans Cuba, Ghana, Africa, even Oakland, and how culture connects to ancient times.
Okay, so
That's
I
kind
really want to give my full appreciation for you taking time out of your day to be with us via Skype. I know that you were very busy today, but I really appreciate you taking us into your world once again. If anybody wants to see more of your paintings, when we roll the credits, I'll put her website up. Thank you for coming with us today on Corinne's Picks. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Wonderful seeing you again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.